Well, hello everyone. This is Dr. Amigues, your friendly rheumatologist and the host of Unabridged MD, Unabridged MD podcast. And today we are so lucky to have come back with us Dr. Sarah Stombaugh. She is an obesity medicine specialist, and we are going to talk about the lifestyle changes that we can do, that we can all do. And I think we are all for a treat since Thanksgiving and the holidays are coming very soon. So this is going to be wonderful for us to be reminded. Dr. Stombaugh, thank you so much for being here. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Meek, for having me today. We had so much fun on our last episode, so I'm really excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And I think we're going to jump right in. So, especially in the specialty that you have, which is weight loss, what are so you must see a lot of patients with issues with weight. And what are the main issue and how do you put it with the lifestyle? And when do you think lifestyle is more important than medication? And just tell us a little bit how you approach this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think so as someone who does medical weight loss and wanting to support my patients, it's really important to approach it to a very comprehensive plan. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the popularization of GLP medications, the Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound, Mounjaro, semaglutide, tirzepatide, right? There's so many different ones out there, and these are really phenomenal. And so a lot of patients are coming to me and asking about these medications, and there's sometimes like, oh, is it cheating to use the medication, or what role? I don't want to use the medication if I want to make sure I'm changing my lifestyle as well. And the answer is all of that is important, right? When we think about supporting our health and weight goals, while medications may play a role and absolutely do for a lot of my patients, all of the other steps, the diet, the movement, the stress management, the sleep, the improvement of other medical conditions, all of these things really must play a role together. And so I work with my patients to create a comprehensive plan. And so there are patients who kind of come in day one and they're interested about starting on medications, and we support them with that. But very commonly people like, hey, let me try some of this lifestyle stuff. Let me implement this first and then see, maybe I'll layer on the medications later or maybe not. And so we really like to support patients in building that lifestyle piece, because it's all important, and we can do this in a sort of slow and gradual way. So it becomes, you hear that cliche of, oh, I want it to be a lifestyle change. I don't want a diet, I want a lifestyle change. But the reality is, when we can support someone in slowly over time shifting their lifestyle, it makes a huge difference in their long-term outcomes.
That makes sense. I totally have seen this with my own patients. It's and what I think is really cool is that those lifestyle, and I'm hoping that you're going to go into a little bit of details here, but those lifestyle changes actually help. So, for example, if you have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or ankylosing spondylitis or gout or psoriatic arthritis, all of those lifestyle medication actually help also those condition. Having looked at the studies on breast cancer, there's also we know that it can prevent recurrence. So what I'm sure there's not one size fit all, but in general, what do you recommend patients to do when it comes to lifestyle changes?
Absolutely. So especially when we're thinking about the dietary component, I like to meet someone where they're at. So we often start with doing food logging to understand what's happening right now, because I'm often meeting people at different places of their journey in terms of what types of food they're consuming, their intentionality around eating related to hunger versus for other things like stress eating or other emotional eating, things that come up. So at first we're just paying attention to what is actually happening, and then how do we start to shift it in the direction of our goals. And when I think about an end goal, that is going to look really similar for most of my patients, such that we're focusing on a diet that's really low in processed foods. So things, especially sugar, especially flour, especially processed oils, for example, that we're looking for a diet that's really going to minimize those things, that we are including lots of fiber, foods in their whole form when we can, that we're including fats in the diet, but in a really intentional way that especially unsaturated fats, fats that come from seeds, fats that come from nuts, fats that come from other plant sources, from fishes, that those unsaturated fats are a phenomenal source of fat, being intentional about how we consume saturated fats, and consuming those when they are part of a high quality meat or dairy product, for example, and then really being intentional about unnecessary added fats in the diet, really making sure that we're emphasizing protein, especially lean proteins, especially plant-based proteins, and choosing those in a way that is going to create satiety. So we're choosing whole foods that are these sometimes large volumes. Think about a plant-based diet that would take a lot of food, but would have a very low calorie count while having a very high nutritional count. We're sort of moving in direction of those goals. But for some people, it will start with, you know, I talk to patients all the time who are eating like no protein in their diet. It's kind of wild. People who eat sort of no protein and no vegetables. And so looking at how do we start to build this in a way that is really enjoyable. If you have 5 vegetables that you like and you hate the rest of them, fine. Let's really focus on how do we prepare those vegetables in an intentional way, build those into the diet? How do we space protein throughout the day? How do we choose the forms that are going to be best in line with your health goals? And so everybody's moving towards this diet that emphasizes whole foods, emphasizes fiber, emphasizes protein, and if for different people, it will be a different process to get there.
Sorry, I was muted. But yeah, no, so that sounds really good. It's funny. So we use this term whole food, plant-based, non-processed. And I realized, so when I was a resident, I think, my second residency in New York City, I was in Harlem, and I realized, I remember like being next to a patient and being like, all right, let's do something together. Let's try to lose weight. And so it was kind of like, okay, we're going to be on this journey together, you and I. And I just realized, I was like, okay, so what are you eating tonight, right? And she was like, and she looks at me with a blank stare, and she was like, I'm realizing I only know how to cook. It's not braided. What is it? Like, the KFC, what is it called? It's
Fried chicken.
Yeah, fried, exactly. So everything she did fried. And at that point, I was like, okay, here's the thing. Like, if you don't actually spell out what whole food, plant-based, or whole food is, no one, it takes forever to understand that anything sugary is actually processed. And so you're like, yeah, because I'll have patients who say, so processed food, what about sugar? I'm like, actually, that's processed.
It's very highly processed, right?
Right. And I think like that's something when you're in this place, like of all, that's what you do, that's what you're studying, you understand what is processed food. I think that the vast majority of people, and I'm going to include myself, like, 10 years ago, I had no idea what it meant. I thought processed food was anything packaged, but, sugar is okay. If I make my own baked good, then I've made it. It's not processed.
Right. It's like, I know the ingredients. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like, oh no, actually that is processed. And it's kind of like explaining to patients like vegetables and fruits that is not processed. And you're like, okay. And then you can see the face of patients just going down and like, only vegetables, only fruits.
And like grains in their whole forms. I'll talk about cooking, farro or quinoa or these grains in their whole forms. And they're like, well, what about whole grain bread? And I'm like, oh, right. Like that's a very highly processed food, but it may be a step in the direction of their goals. And so I think that's one of the things that's so important is a lot of times you hear this and it's like, oh my gosh, that would shake my world to just today I'm eating one way and tomorrow I've thrown out all of the food in my house and I'm trying to prepare food in a different way, let alone can my kids eat that? Will my spouse eat that? Do other people in my friends and family, will they be participating in this with me? And so it can be. And I think for people, depending on certain health diagnoses, it's like, hey, I'm making a change and today and tomorrow are going to look black and white different from one another. And that can make sense in certain journeys. And in other ones, it can be a gradual shift from one to the other.
Yeah, I love that. I had someone tell me, don't, or I don't know if I read this, but it was like, don't look at what you're removing, but rather what you're adding. And so it's something that I personally do. I wonder if you do. Well, they come to you wanting to lose weight, so I guess that's different. But for me, it's more like, I'm gonna recommend that you add two different vegetables per day. Like, can you
Mhm.
add vegetable and then start with that? Because
Yeah.
then it doesn't look as scary as removing things.
Mhm.
I
Well,
tried this with my kids.
yeah. Well, and it's that mindset too when we think of our frame shift of looking at things that we can't have. I mean, for one, that can feel really, we can feel a lot of deprivation that comes with that. We can sometimes start putting those foods in a pedestal and craving them even more, and maybe then turning to binge on those foods because we have put them completely off of limits versus the shift of mindset of what are the things I'm adding to my diet, or really just emphasizing the foods that I already like and enjoy in some quantity. What are the foods that I like that are in line with my health goals that I'm already doing? Okay, great. How can we do more of that?
I love that. I think that that's really, really good actually, to just like, how can we do more of what we are doing well?
Hmm.
I think that's really wonderful. So this is the diet piece. Is there any of
Hmm.
the lifestyle changes that you recommend?
Yes, absolutely. So thinking about movement, and when we think about movement, generally we can break that into two categories. Thinking of things, cardio movement, so cardiorespiratory fitness. What are the things that really get our heart rate pumping, get us breathing hard, get us like hot and sweaty and all of that? And then resistance training, where we're thinking of building muscle mass. Now, both of these things are really important and serve different roles in our health and in our weight. And we know that they're really important for supporting us in terms of longevity. And then, especially in the weight loss journey, that we're really intentional about supporting our muscle mass. And so we'll talk about incorporating both of those things. And again, this is something that, a lot of times early in the journey, month one and month two, we're really focused more on the dietary piece. And then we start to layer on the movement piece. Now, if they're already doing that, I don't stop someone, but I don't want to say on day one, go do these 10 different changes. It's after a couple of months of working together that the diet stuff has sort of gotten into a good groove, and we can start to layer on things like movement, for example.
Okay, so first is diet. Well, I don't like diet word, but nutrition
Yeah,
choices.
nutrition. Yes.
First,
Hmm.
nutrition choice. Second is movement. And I like
Hmm.
to use the word movement and not exercise, because it is,
Hmm.
right. Like it is movement. What else do you think helps your patients when it comes to diet, like, losing weight, really?
Yeah. So, a few other things we also think about sleep, especially as adults in America. We are not great sleepers. I think our society really praises people who sleep less. There's this idea that if you're sleeping less and you're working harder, but the reality is sleep is such an important restorative thing. That doesn't just make us feel good, but physiologically can have very healing properties, help us decrease insulin resistance, can be very helpful really in almost any illness or disease state in order to improve our health. Getting good quantity of sleep and good quality of sleep is important. And so we talk through both diagnosis of any underlying sleep disorders that may be there, as well as just improving the pre-bedtime routine. What does your sleep hygiene look like? Are you actually helping yourself to unwind after a long day and move towards restful sleep? We'll talk about that. And then we do a lot of coaching behaviors too around food, because it's not, we think about like a processed food, we think about a cookie or a brownie or a candy or a dessert that we really love. It's not that we can't eat those things ever again for the rest of our lives, but how do we choose those in a way that feels really intentional? How do we choose those in a way that when we're eating those, we eat a quantity that's in line with our goals, that we really savor it? We really take each bite, we taste the flavors, we feel the texture in our mouth, and that we can really enjoy the experience of that food and incorporate it in this very intentional way where that food doesn't feel like, it's not being consumed in a binge, it's not being consumed as just part of our normal routine, but as a way that feels really exciting and really enjoyable. And there's not any guilt or shame that follows having chosen to eat that food. And so a lot of coaching work too around how do we handle different situations like vacation or a family dinner or going to a work event or whatever it is, we find ourselves running out the door, how to cook a meal for our kid that our kids will also like. For each individual person, what are the obstacles that are coming up, and how can we support them in making a decision that will be really in line with not someone else's goals, but their own?
Hmm. That's actually a really good point. And I wonder if you could go a little bit more in detail since Thanksgiving and the holidays are coming. You make
Mhm.
good with your diet, and then suddenly there's Thanksgiving coming. And I do love this holiday.
Mhm.
Like, what do you
Yes.
patients? Like, what's the tricks here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with Thanksgiving, I love Thanksgiving also. And so thinking about whether it's Thanksgiving or whether it's something else, what are your intentions going into it? So having a plan of how do I want to approach the situation? How to create a plan that feels very doable, such that on the other side of the meal or the holiday or the travel, whatever it is, that I feel really good because I stuck to the decision that I made in advance. So it doesn't have to be a caloric restriction. It doesn't have to be I'm only going to have one serving. It can be I'm going to be mindful of how I build my plate. And so, we think about my plate, for example, and am I going to build a plate that is a quarter protein and half vegetables and a quarter starch? And that's a made up example, but, having an idea in advance of what a plate would look like that would appropriately meet my nutrition needs, but then also meet some of my favorites. If you love mashed potatoes or you love sweet potatoes, that you've dedicated a quarter of your plate, for example, to that and deciding in advance, okay, I'd love to have one piece of pie. And so I'm going to have one piece of pie and I'm really going to enjoy it rather than I'm going to have three different slices of three different pies. Or maybe you have three tiny slices of three different pies. Thinking about satiety. So I work with my patients on understanding what is their hunger, what is their satiety. A lot of times we can choose the amount of food that will meet our appropriate satiety goals. And so if we think about how much food does it take to create that satiety for me? How do I build a plate based on that? How do I eat until appropriate satiation and then stop? Because I'm sure you've had the experience, I think we all have, of eating a meal that was just so good. We got kind of wrapped up in maybe the emotion of it, the experience of it, the foods that we either have put off limits or are special to that time of year, that then we eat and we eat and we eat, and now we've overeaten. And now we went from appropriately full to just beyond full, and our bodies all of a sudden feel uncomfortable, and the meal becomes less enjoyable. And so the experience went from being like really positive to now actually like, oh, like I feel just full. I feel overly sick. I'm like wishing I was wearing sweatpants. I'm, unbuttoning my pants. Like I feel really uncomfortable. And that actually takes away from the enjoyment of the meal. And so when we can plan in advance to stop at our satiety signals, so we can build the intention, we can stop at our satiety signals, just deciding those things in advance can feel really empowering.
Mhm. And so I have a follow-up question on this. I feel like there's a lot of guilt. Um,
Mhm.
so, right, so and it's happened to me, so I can share this personally, right? You're like, oh, I'm being so good. It's Thanksgiving. I'm going to eat and I'm going to be very good with my portion control. And then the food comes in and it's like incredible. So you take a second piece and then you feel guilty. How do you work with your patients about that?
Mhm. Well, I think the setting the intentionality of what you're doing in advance and setting it in a way that feels very doable. And so if you want to have two pieces of pie, deciding that in advance and then having two pieces of pie feels very different than I'm just going to have one, I'm just going to have one. And then you have two and you're like, shoot, I didn't align with my goals. So setting a goal that feels doable is the first thing that we can do of let's set this doable goal and then achieve that goal. And then you have this experience of building that relationship with yourself so that you feel really confident that I am someone who does what I say I'm going to do. So setting that realistic goal is the first part of it. The second part of it, though, is mindfully reflecting afterwards. And this can be really well done with the support of an obesity medicine physician, with a therapist, with a coach, someone who's used to doing this sort of behavior. Because I think after having an experience like that where you're having the guilt, We can do a couple of different things. Sometimes we beat ourselves up for an unnecessary amount of time. Sometimes we just forgive ourselves and move on super quickly. But there's actually this intermediate space where we pause, we reflect on the situation, we think about the emotions we were experiencing, the reasons why we made that decision, and we work to really how do we workshop that situation because you're going to be in a similar situation in the future. And so, what lesson would I like to take away from that? And then how do I apply that the next time I'm in a similar situation? So really using it as a learning example for the future is one of the best ways we can move forward from that.
I really like that. Thank you so much. Is there any piece of advice that you would want to share with our auditors right now? Or is there anything else that you would want to add before we close this episode?
Yes, absolutely. I think the weight loss journey is something that can be done in a sustainable way that is not just about weight, but really about overall health. And so working with someone who is going to support you in that way, and it's really fun because you start to see improvement not just in the number in the scale or a decrease in the number in the scale, but seeing improvement in other health conditions, things like rheumatoid arthritis or other inflammatory arthritis conditions. Oftentimes in the weight loss journey and following certain diet plans, we find that there's improvement of other health conditions. We find that our body moves better for us, it functions better for us. And so it's not just about the weight, but it's really about our overall health and supporting us in optimizing that.
Okay, I love this. Thank you so much. Well, Dr. Stombaugh, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I am doing my best to be everywhere. I have a podcast called the Conquer Your Weight podcast. It's a weekly podcast. I'm also on social media on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Good Self, which is a new platform that works on supporting patients in their weight loss journey in a safe environment where they can get non-biased advice. And then recently, I have launched an online course as well. So for patients who are taking GLP medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, semaglutide, Zepbound, Mounjaro, tirzepatide, that if they feel like that they are not getting the support they need, they're wondering about what nutrition recommendations should they follow, what exercise recommendations should they be doing, what should they be thinking about with vacation or with dosing their medication or managing side effects. We have answers to all of those. And so I've been supporting patients with that and non-patients with that as well. So that's available at my website at www.sarahstombaughnmd.com/GLP. And you can find all my resources on my website as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so, so much. Dr. Stombaugh, I'm sure we'll have a third part for this. In the meantime, I think we can wish everyone to have very, very happy holidays when they're coming, because we are mid-October. Probably this will show up in early November. And this was all super helpful and good reminders for those who knew already some of this, and very nice ideas and things that we can actually implement right away. So thank you again, Dr. Stombaugh. And everyone, see you next week. And don't forget to share this episode with someone that you think will get some benefit from it.